Roar. Glad I spent $10 on a shitty Godzilla mask for that 2-second bit. LOL.
And all I've got to offer is sensitivity, intelligence, and charm.
I've recently gotten very into Kaiju movies. What are Kaiju movies, you might be asking? Maybe. Well, ask no more. Kaiju is a Japanese genre of movie featuring giant monsters. The term kaiju can also refer to the giant monsters themselves, which are usually depicted engaging in combat with the military, other kaiju, and destroying cities. The most popular kaiju is Mr. Zilla himself. This mask sucks. Who made his first appearance in 1954. Other notable members of the kaiju band include Rodan, Mechagodzilla, King Ghidorah, and the ultimate girl boss, Mothra. Also, maybe King Kong if you want to get pedantic about it. When it comes to kaijus, Toho Ltd is king. Sorry, King Ghidorah. Producing over 32 Godzilla films alone. Sorry, I feel like I need to reiterate that. Those are only the Godzilla ones. The number of kaiju movies that Toho has produced in total is probably more than double that. Actually, I just counted, it's 74. These guys have been putting these movies out every couple years since 1954, and have never stopped, with Godzilla vs. Kong being the most recent release. Now, that's obviously a lot of movies. So, quality, varies, to say the least. And for a while there, in the 70s and 80s, things got pretty ridiculous. But I think the early films especially can kind of act as a time capsule caught on tape, tracing the ever-changing anxieties of the world and its possible end, with giant, alien, dinosaur monsters. While the kaiju movies of the late 70s and the 80s were mass-produced goofy romps, that's far from how kaijus got their start. The first kaiju movie, not counting King Kong, was 1954's Godzilla, a harrowing look at the consequences of nuclear war. And this movie was released less than 10 years after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki in 1945, and the influence is palpable. For those uninitiated, Godzilla is, well, a giant radiation lizard, the result of hydrogen bomb testing awakening him from his millennia-long nap. Those who come in close contact with Godzilla suffer from radiation poisoning, and after his defeat at the end of the film via the controversial oxygen destroyer, which disintegrates oxygen atoms and kills its inventor in the process of destroying Zilla, one of the protagonists, Yamane, muses, "If nuclear weapons testing continues, another Godzilla may rise in the future." Now that's not very subtle, and I feel like it doesn't need much explanation from me. The tone of the film is incredibly somber and serious. You aren't going to find any Mecha Godzillas or Frankensteins here. This early era of kaiju was all about tackling these anxieties that were looming over the world, particularly in Japan. Take, for example, Rodan. Released in 1956, 2 years after Godzilla. Rodan is a big jet-like bird dinosaur, awakened as a result of climate change, who flies over the world at supersonic speeds, destroying everything in his path. This touches on a couple of threats of the era. For one, I was kind of amazed to see climate change referenced as early as 1956. It's a wonder that no one's done anything about that yet. For two, Rodan's method of attack. Flying quickly overhead and destroying cities, with gusts of wind from his massive wings and dive bombing into buildings. It feels very reminiscent of the fire bombings experienced by Japan in World War II. By the way, if you're looking for a good movie that touches on that era of firebombing in Japan, I really recommend Studio Ghibli's The Wind Rises. It is a beautiful movie. So, there you go. Or just watch Rodon. Now, things start to get a little bit goofier in 1961 with Mothra. Also, we're in color now, but it still, for the most part, maintains the somber tone of this era of kaiju movies. Mothra is about a group of scientists that travel to the fictional infant island, only to discover that the natives there worship a giant egg that will, eventually, hatch into Mothra. Mothra is tended to by two small women, or fairies, I guess, who are kidnapped by the sensationalist entrepreneur Nelson and made to perform the secret fairy show for a profit. This provokes Mothra into attacking Japan and then the world. So, to me at least, this is pretty clearly a cautionary tale about imperialism and the greed that capitalism can breed. A 1960s Japan, or the Showa period, was a time with a lot of labor strikes, protests, and big questions regarding Japan's relationship with the rest of the world, and the status of its borders. It's also worth noting that pre-World War II imperialist Japan was still fresh in the minds of a lot of people. And I think if you really sit back and look at Mothra, a lot of these elements are present in this movie about a giant bug. All of this, of course, leading us to the space age, and with it, aliens. Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, released in 1964, 5 years before the moon landing, but right smack in the middle of the space age, which started in 1957. For those of you who, don't know, Ghidorah is a alien, and the movie, named after King Ghidorah himself, has a lot to do with things like, the very real and very scientific UFO society, and an alien princess, and planets being destroyed. And, well, you get the picture. Ghidorah is coming to destroy Earth, and this alien princess tries to warn humanity but is greatly ignored. Eventually, the human race turns to Godzilla, Rodan, and Mothra, and asks them to team up to defeat this existential threat. Don't worry about how all those guys are still alive after being defeated at the end of their movies, except for Mothra. She's chill at the end of her movie. It's not important. And that's basically the plot. Obviously, this is a bit more out there than the radioactive horror of Godzilla, and it has a real sense of humor about it. The way the good guy kaijus all interact with each other honestly verges on slapstick. And it's a lot of fun. I enjoyed it. I do recommend being under the influence, if you're of age. Ghidorah, the three-headed monster, is only the first of many kaiju movies of the 60s and 70s that had to do with terrors from outer space. And that's just the thing. Space was captivating the imagination of the world at the time. And with that captivation came a sense of existential dread. Are we really that insignificant? What could possibly be out there? Surely not a golden three-headed dragon. Unless... The point is, humanity was starting to explore space, and that was exciting and really anxiety-inducing. So we made goofy movies about it that didn't take themselves too seriously. For the most part, there's definitely some melodrama in there, to be sure. Don't get me wrong. But the goofiness of kaiju movies during the space age had nothing on what was coming in the 80s. Japan saw a huge economic boom in the 1980s. Their borders were open, we had been to the moon, the bomb was dropped 4 decades ago, and opulence was the word. And kaiju got wild. The wildness actually started in the 70s. I would say with Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla in 1974. In this movie, Godzilla fights Mechagodzilla, who is a robot Godzilla. And it's just as wonderful as you'd imagine. The kaiju movies of the 70s and 80s were just so incredibly ridiculous and camp, and I honestly kind of wish we still got some of this. The kaiju movies these days try to take themselves so seriously, and they're so stupid. Stop giving me muted tones and give me big puppets. I was thrilled to see Mechagodzilla show up in Godzilla vs. Kong, though. 70s and 80s kaiju movies knew they were stupid and relished in it. The 80s, for straight men, was a time of bombastic, ridiculous peacocking, and all that reflects directly back onto these giant puppet monsters, as the history before this point did as well. So, the point, I guess, is that even the most seemingly ridiculous pieces of media, like Godzilla, carries with it history and politics. Your average person might not even know that kaiju movies started as somber reflections on the aftermath of World War II, and only grew more flamboyantly fun as the world did. Old movies oftentimes act as time capsules, especially if you take the time to learn the history surrounding them. They can tell us about the anxieties that plagued a moment in history, and its existential implications. So why not pop open a bottle of wine and go watch some TCM? Hello friends, I hope you liked the video. As you can probably tell, I've recently gotten very into the big puppet alien bug dinosaurs. If you liked the video, why not give it a thumbs up or leave a comment? Maybe even subscribe? If you want to support the channel, links to Patreon and merch are in the link tree in the description. Patrons get all sorts of fun stuff like Discord access, the chance to vote on future video topics, credit at the end of videos, all that good stuff. If you didn't like the video, you must be fun at parties. Bye!